Josh from Guardian Train Consulting. I get a lot of questions pertaining to your modern day striker-fired handguns, such as the Glock, HK VP9, Smith & Wesson M&P series, the SIG P320, and the Springfield XD. A lot of people ask, they're like, well, Josh, if the Glock or the modern striker-fired gun like those other models, they don't have manual safety, so they don't have any flip safeties. Say, for example, like this AR-15 that has a flip safety. So if they don't have a flip safety or an active safety or manual safety, then inherently they're more dangerous. And nothing could be further from the truth. So again, the first firearm safety rule we talk about is treat all firearms as if they are loaded, right? Of all the firearms that I typically see accidents and was due to negligence in my law enforcement career, where people have shot their walls, they've shot their TVs, they've shot their pets, and on a couple occasions I've actually responded to individuals shooting their own children. And it all is really in that realm of negligence. It's not an accidental discharge. An accidental discharge is when something mechanical in the firearm breaks and it actually discharges. A majority of what we see in the news and what I responded to as a police officer was handling a firearm in a negligent manner. And that's a culpable mental state from a criminality perspective as well as from a litigation perspective. And so somebody was handling their firearm negligently and the gun discharged and hurt somebody or destroyed property. So typically two things that are said after a negligent discharge. One, I didn't know the gun was loaded, which violates rule number one. And then two, the gun just went off. The guns don't just go off. If we can fully accept that if I fully load this Glock 17, right, I load it full of ammo, right, and send that slide home and it's fully loaded mechanically, and I sit there and stare at it, will the gun go off? No. It's the same thing as expecting a piece of paper with a pen and expecting it to animate, that pen to animate and start writing a thesis. It's not going to happen. So how do firearms negligently discharge? Well, one, the firearm has to be loaded, right? The firearm has in the semi-automatic handgun, magazine in and the chamber is loaded, right? So that's the first step. The firearm has to be loaded mechanically. The second thing is it has to be pointed at a body part or a place that you don't wish to neutralize, destroy, or willing to purchase, right? So that's rule number two of our firearm safety rules is never point your firearm at anything you're not willing to neutralize, willing to destroy, or willing to purchase. So again, if I point it at my leg, if I take a mechanically fully loaded firearm and point it at my leg, right? And then the last one is I have to press the trigger, right? So that's firearm safety rule number three, right? Keep your finger straight along the frame, which is the grip portion of this firearm. Keep your finger straight along the frame until you possess two things. You're on target and have made that conscious decision to shoot. So I can be on target, but I have not made that conscious decision to shoot. That's when our finger is straight along the frame, right? It's only when we're on target and have made that conscious decision to shoot that our finger goes to the trigger, okay? So you see how all of these things have to happen in order and in succession, but they can happen almost instantaneously, right? So if you think about it, like a negligent discharge where somebody shoots themselves in the leg that we see on YouTube and we see them on the news, right? The gun first had to be loaded. Two, the gun had to be pointed at that body part. And three, you had to press the trigger. Because these modern day striker-fired firearms, there are at least three safeties in this gun. The first one on the Glock has that Glock safe action, which is that mini trigger in the middle, right? So if I push the side of this trigger without pushing that center part, right, it doesn't go click. So if I then take the center part of that trigger and I push backwards, now the striker will go forward, right? And then the other part that's within this firearm is there's actually a safety plunger that as that trigger bar is going backwards and it's going up, it's actually depressing that safety plunger. And I'll show you what it looks like right here. So as this part is going back, so as I'm pressing the trigger, this trigger bar is going up and back, and it's depressing this safety plunger right here. So you can see right now that this striker right here cannot move. But if I push the safety plunger in and I push forward on this striker, it actually moves. And then you can see now that the firing pin or the striker is exposed. So if I even take a hammer and try to hammer that striker forward without pushing that safety plunger upwards, right, with that trigger bar, right, the striker can't move forward and hit the primer, which then detonates the round. So that's safety number 2. And then the last part is this striker is in a half cock position. So as you press that trigger, not only as that trigger bar goes backwards, that trigger bar is coming up and deactivating the safety plunger. This back part now, this cruciform back here, is actually pulling back this striker ever so slightly, right, and going to a full cock, and then it drops out of the way and allows that striker to go forward while that safety plunger is being deactivated. So you can see that a lot of things are happening by way of pressing the trigger. But the only way for this Glock 17 or any modern day striker fired firearm for it to go off, the only way it's going to go off is 1, the gun has to be loaded. 2, it has to be pointed at a part of your body if God forbid you hurt yourself with your firearm. And 3, you have to press the trigger. So, and again, I'm not going to do this, but I can drop this from the Empire State Building fully loaded, and with all these safety features in place and improperly working, the gun will not go off. I can hammer nails with a fully loaded Glock, which is not recommended, obviously, but I can do that and mechanically this gun will not go off. The only way this firearm will go off is 1, if it's loaded, 2, you point it in a direction that you don't wish to point it at, and 3, you press the trigger, and instead of it going click, it goes bang. They are inanimate objects. And so when we get into the debate about firearm safety in children, the question is, do you secure your knives in your knife block at home, in the kitchen, right? Do you have hot pots of water in your stove and they're not locked up and they're on your stovetop? You've taught your children to be safe around those items. The same thing goes as a firearm, whether it's a knife block full of knives. At no point is, I'm sure your child has ever gone to the knife block and pulled out a knife and start cutting themselves or hurting other people with those knives. The same thing goes with firearms. We just have to respect them and not fear them and be responsible for them. That's what we're trying to teach here at Guardian Training Consulting, is responsible firearms ownership. I'm Josh with Guardian Training Consulting. Have a great day.